There's no denying that baking is massive right now, and with that comes loads of trends and fads. But one thing that's here to stay is the cupcake. Now my recipe is based on that American classic sandwich of peanut butter and jelly, or jam, as we're British after all. They're a light vanilla and peanut butter flavoured cupcake with a hidden strawberry jam filling, topped off with a smooth peanut butter frosting, and then finished with chopped peanuts and strawberry pieces. Now these are based around a simple Victoria sponge essentially. So I've just got some flora buttery, which is great because it starts off soft, so there's no need to take it out of the fridge early. And then to that I'm going to add some golden caster sugar because it gives that lovely sort of toffee flavour. So I'm using some smooth peanut butter. That's going to act as part of the fat in the cake, and then blend it all up together. And then go in with the eggs. It's really important when you're adding eggs into a mix like this, just to do them one at a time, otherwise the mixture can curdle. And then give it a blend. And then in with the second egg. Just give it a quick push down on the side, just to make sure that's all mixing in nice and evenly. And then in with a little bit of vanilla extract. And then self-raising flour to give that lovely lift. And just for a little bit of extra help, some baking powder. Sieve that over and then fold everything together. This is just a little bit thick, so you want to add a splash of milk just to loosen down the mixture slightly. So there we are, cake mixture's ready. Then take half of the cupcake mixture and divide it between 12 cupcake cases. So that's those half full. I can go and get my jam. I've kept it in the fridge because it just makes it that little bit easier to spoon. Using peanut butter, it's got to be strawberry jam that goes with it. So what will happen is the cake mixture will bake around the jam, trapping it on the inside and turning it kind of warm and liquid. So when you break inside, you can have this lovely strawberry jam oozing out. So the jam's in, and then all that's left to do is just top off with the remaining mixture. Just make sure that when you put the mixture over, it just falls down and covers that jam completely, because you don't want it to leak out. So these guys are ready for the oven to about 20 to 25 minutes at 170 degrees. Once the cakes are out of the oven, transfer them to a wire rack and leave them to cool completely. For the frosting, I'm using some more smooth peanut butter and then some more flora buttery. Just combine them in a stand mixer and blend them until they're smooth, but don't overwork it because the mixture can split. In with the icing sugar, and I've just sieved this to make sure there's no lumps in it. And just work it together by hand so you don't end up with clouds of icing sugar all over the work surface. Add a little splash of milk just to loosen the mixture, and then beat it again for another couple of minutes until it's really smooth and shiny. There you go, that's all it needs. And then that is your lovely peanut butter frosting. So take a piping bag, and then I fit it with a star nozzle here, which is going to create really lovely lines. It's really important that when you top the cupcakes, they are completely cold. What will happen is this lovely frosting will start to melt and it will run down the side of the cake. So now the best bit of any cake, the decorating. Take one of your cupcakes and then just pipe it on in a rough circle and then spiral up to the top and pull away. So you get that lovely wavy lines. I've got some chopped peanuts, sprinkle them over, and then some of these freeze-dried strawberry pieces. Just scatter them over. The crunchy peanuts and pieces of dried strawberry finish the cupcake really nicely and tie together all of those flavours in there. And when you break it open, you're going to have that hidden pocket of strawberry jam. And they're as simple as that. My peanut.
I'm going to be making triple chocolate pastry bites. And these are a really great activity to make with children and great to serve at a kids' party as well. Firstly, we're going to add the butter and the cream cheese into the food processor. Now, cream cheese is really good in pastry as it makes it really flaky and light, which is exactly what we want. Perfect. Add in half of our flour and just a pinch of salt as well. And pulse again. And now for the final half of the flour. And pulse it together until we have a nice soft and sticky dough. I'm just going to flour my board here and use my spatula to empty the dough out from the food processor, which you just want to bring together to be a ball using the flour on your surface. Just pop it onto some cling film, wrap it up and put it in the fridge to chill, just so it firms up a bit. Once the dough has been chilling in the fridge for a couple of hours, I'm going to roll it out, just coating it in flour as I go. I'm using my cutter to cut out circles. In the middle, I'm going to put some chocolate spread. You don't want to put too much because it will seep out. I've also got some dark chocolate chunks and some white chocolate buttons, which I've chopped up to make them a little bit smaller. Use a pot of water and a brush just to seal the edges of our pastry. So I'm dipping my pastry brush in there, and I'm just going to paint the water all the way around the sides of the circle. Lightly flour our hands and roll them. So I'm popping it on my prepared baking tray, just lined with some baking parchment. Once all of your pastry balls are rolled, you need to pop them into the fridge to chill. Before you bake your pastry bites, you need to give them an egg wash and a hat of hundreds and thousands. And I'm going to use a toothpick. And I've got here some egg with a few drops of water that I've just beaten together and a pastry brush. And you don't want to put too much egg on, just enough to kind of coat it, and it will help it turn nice and golden brown in the oven. And then we're going to give it a hat of hundreds and thousands. So just dipping it in, give it a bit of a twist, pop it back on your baking tray, and repeat the process with all the others. All the pastry bites are ready to go in the oven now for about 15 to 20 minutes. When they're ready, leave them to cool completely on a wire rack. So there you have it, my triple chocolate pastry bites.
I'm making some baked banana and honey donuts with an almond butter glaze. They're inspired by my breakfast because I'm obsessed with having almond butter, banana and honey on toast. So first of all, I'm just going to take some ripe bananas and put them straight into a bowl. And then just take a fork, just mash it up until it's kind of like a smooth paste. So the mashed banana is going to add a lovely flavour to the cake batter. They also add moisture and sweetness. Then we're going to take an egg. Just want to get that nicely mixed in. Now we're going to get really nice honey, some nice light honey here so it's not going to overwhelm the flavour of the banana. I really like adding a bit of cinnamon, and I also like to add salt at this stage. Melt some butter. And as this is kind of like a muffin batter, you don't really need to sift in the flour. Just to give it some lift, we're adding a teaspoon of baking powder as well. And then just fold that in. You don't want to over mix it because if you mix it too much you start to develop the gluten and then it gets like heavy and a bit chewy. So next we can just put it straight into our baked donut tin that we've got here. I've just greased it lightly with some spray oil. So you're just going to spoon it in. You don't want to overfill it because if you overfill with these pans then it kind of rises over the dome bit in the middle and then it doesn't really look like a donut in the end. And then you can put this straight in the oven. So while the donuts are baking, we're just going to get on with the almond butter glaze. I've got 50 grams of unsalted butter here in the pan. So just got some smooth almond butter right here. And because the butter's warm, it will melt the almond butter. You just need to grab a little bit more honey because you're just going to make it kind of sweet. There's only a tablespoon of adding here because we've already got some honey in the batter. And then this will just kind of thicken the glaze up too and make it stick to the donuts better. And then your glaze is ready. So you just want to put them on your rack to cool for a little bit. The glaze is still nice and warm, so it's going to soak into the donuts really nicely. So you just take one, just dip it in, let the excess drip off, and then just do that with all the donuts. Okay, so final touch. We've just got some blanched almonds that have been roughly chopped up, so they're kind of crunchy still, so you get some nice texture. And you're just going to sprinkle those straight onto the donuts while the glaze is still warm, because then as the glaze cools and sets, the almonds will stick to the donuts nicely. So I've got my banana and honey baked donuts with almond butter glaze.
It's incredible how the humble scone can be the subject of such debate and controversy, but whatever you call them, whatever you top them with and however you eat them, scones are an undeniable fundamental part of our British culture.
Scones may take the name from the stone of Scone, where it's said that Scottish kings were crowned. Sweet or savoury, scone or scone, these traditional quick breads are dependably delicious in all variations. Scones are the cornerstone of the traditional afternoon tea, a British institution which began in the 19th century. The counties of Devon and Cornwall both claim the cream tea, as scones served with jam and clotted cream, as their own, and argue over the best way to serve it.
So whatever you plan to do with your scones, a good rise is absolutely vital.
A good measure of baking powder is essential to ensure your scones are fluffy and light.
So I'm making fruit scones with a twist. I'm swapping the traditional raisins for cranberries and orange zest. Now the cranberries give a gorgeous fruity tang, while the orange zest, of course, gives a beautiful citrus kick. One thing you don't want to do is overwork the dough. Scones should be light in texture and fluffy, so a gentle touch is an absolute must.
When the dough is formed, gently bring the ingredients together and form into a circle, ready for cutting.
Now there's nothing wrong with the dainty little round scones, that's absolutely fine, but I much prefer big, hearty triangles. So, with a floured knife, cut the dough into about 8 wedges. Just look at these scones. Slightly rustic, but perfectly puffed up. Now, if you're not going to eat them straight away, then cover them with a damp tea towel so they cool, steam, and stay perfectly soft.
These cranberry, orange and white chocolate scones are airy and infused with wonderful flavours. For my twist on the classic afternoon tea, simply serve with marmalade and clotted cream.
I'm making apple and cinnamon crumble cake, which is perfect for bonfire night. It's so portable, you can just cut it into squares, take it outside and enjoy it by the bonfire. It's somewhere between a cake and a dessert, but either way it's absolutely delicious. A soft vanilla sponge, topped with sweet apples, and then finished with a delicious caramelly crunchy crumble with hazelnuts and cinnamon. For the crumble mix, it's really simple. Just take some plain flour and some butter. It needs to be really, really cold so you can work it in and get that breadcrumb consistency. And then some cinnamon. And cinnamon just goes so well with apples, which are at their prime at this time of year. So work it together, just use your fingertips. Make sure all that butter's rubbed in. And that's what you're aiming for. You want this lovely fine texture, unlike breadcrumbs. And then some demerara sugar, some chopped roasted hazelnuts, and then toss that all together gently just to combine. Now it's as simple as that. That's the crumble done, and that can just go in the fridge while I make the rest of the cake. And then for the cake mixture. So I've got some plain flour and then some baking powder, and then just sieve those into a bowl. So that's the dry ingredients. Keep those separate for now. And then for the wet ingredients, I've got some milk and a couple of eggs. And then just whisk those together with a fork. It's good to get these ready now, but then you can add them a bit at a time as you get into the cake mix. So for the cake mix, I've got some softened butter. That's going to go straight into a mixer. You could do this with an electric hand whisk as well, and then some golden caster sugar. And golden caster sugar's just got that slight sort of toffee flavour, which works so well with apples. Turn that on. And while the sugar and butter's creaming, I'm just going to add some vanilla bean paste. And this vanilla bean paste is great because you've got that lovely flavour of vanilla, but it's also got the vanilla seeds in there, so you get those lovely little flecks that are going to run through the sponge. So once that's creamed together, it should be really light and pale and fluffy. And then what you can do is start adding the wet and dry ingredients a little bit at a time, and just have the motor running fairly slowly for this. So a little bit of the egg mixture, and then just keep going until you've used up all of your wet and your dry ingredients. And that looks perfect. So I've got a tin here that's lined with greaseproof paper, and then just pour that batter straight into the tin. And already, without even baking it, you get that lovely scent of the vanilla, which is going to permeate through the cake and go really well with the apples and the hazelnuts. And then just smooth that out into the corners of the tin. Before you do the apples, just squeeze some lemon juice into a bowl. It's going to stop the apples from discolouring. I'm using some Braeburn apples here, but you could do something like Cox. They also work really, really nicely. So just peel and core the apples, and then just cut them in half and really finely slice them. And as soon as you slice them, go straight into the lemon juice, give them a quick toss so they're all completely coated to stop them from going brown. And then just keep going with the rest of the apples. It's really important that you slice these apples kind of like that, really sort of wafer thin. You could use a food processor or a mandolin or something like that to help you along your way, but if they're too thick, they're not going to cook evenly. So then just start to layer up the apple. You don't have to be too neat about it because it's going to get covered up by the crumble, just as long as the layering is even, then it's all going to cook evenly as well. And then last but not least, the crumble. So it's just had a bit of time to firm up, and that can go straight over the top of the apples. And then use your hands just to smooth over the crumble and make sure everything's completely covered. And that goes into a hot oven at 180 degrees, and that just goes in for an hour. And after an hour, just test it with a cocktail stick or a small skewer. If it comes out clean, the cake's done. At that point, just take it out, transfer it to a wire rack and leave it to cool before you cut it into squares. Now this cake is fantastic on its own, but even better with a dollop of whipped cream and a little bit of hot toffee sauce.
These are my favourite ever mince pies. They're like a Bakewell tart but with a festive twist, and they're absolutely delicious. I'm going to start with a pastry. I've got some plain flour in a large bowl. I'm going to add some ground almonds, diced butter, and some icing sugar, and the zest of a large orange, and I'm going to use quite a fine grater here. I'm just going to give it a quick stir just to disperse that orange zest. And rub the butter with your fingertips until the mixture resembles breadcrumbs. Now, if you want to save time, you could always use a ready-made sweet short crust pastry, but this one is absolutely wonderful. And then once you're happy with the mixture, you've got no large lumps of butter left, just make a well in the centre and drop in an egg yolk. And if you want to, you can just add a splash of water. I'm going to add just a little drop because I don't want a dry pastry. And then with that knife, just work it together. I find making pastry really therapeutic, and it's a great way to get 5 minutes of peace over Christmas. And I'm just kneading it very lightly in the bowl to make a smooth, quite soft dough. So I'm just going to pop it out. Because it's quite soft, I'm just going to wrap it in cling film and pop it in the fridge for about an hour, just until it firms up nicely and it's ready to roll. So I've rolled up my pastry nice and thinly. It's about the thickness of a £1 coin, and I'm going to stamp out my circles. I'm using a plain cutter, but you could use a fluted one if you prefer. And you're probably going to have to re-roll the trimmings to make sure you've got enough to fill the tartlet tin. Okay, just remove the trimmings and then just gently lift off and just ease it into the base, and don't worry if it overlaps a bit because we have got that filling to go in. And that's the last one just going in, and let's just move that aside. And for the fruity mincemeat layer, I've got some mincemeat in a bowl here. I'm going to add some dried cranberries and just stir those together. And just put small spoonfuls of the mixture into the base of each little tartlet and press it down quite well. And then pop those into the fridge while you make the topping. For the frangipane topping, whisk the butter and sugar together for 3 or 4 minutes until it's pale and fluffy. The mixture is nice and soft now, so I'm just going to turn that off and add an egg and some almond extract and just give it a final whisk up. And then stir in some ground almonds and a tablespoon of flour. Now all we need to do is put a little spoonful of the mixture top of each tartlet and just spread it out to the edges. And try and take the mixture right to the edges if you can. That might just help prevent the mixture from bubbling out from underneath. And then to finish them off, just a little sprinkle of flaked almonds. And then just bake them for 25 to 30 minutes until they're golden. Leave them to cool a little and then dust with icing sugar before serving. They are my frangipane and cranberry mince pies.
My lamb tagine pie is full of warming North African spices and perfect for when those nights are just starting to get a little bit colder. It's got a lovely lamb filling topped with a phyllo pastry coil. So I've got my onions and garlic sweating away in this pan. They've been going for about 10 minutes, so they're nice and soft. So I'm ready to take them out. And then we can get started on browning the lamb. Now the next thing I'm going to do is add my marinated lamb. This has been marinating in cinnamon, coriander and a few other spices overnight. Gives it a really nice spicy flavour. And then just give this a stir until there's no pink remaining on the outside of the meat. I've got my cooked onions and they're going to go back in. A lovely assortment of prunes, apricots and raisins. They add a really nice natural sweetness to the filling. As you slow cook, the fruit will swell and some of it will burst, but that gives a really nice texture. And then I'm adding 2 cans of cherry tomatoes. These give a great texture instead of the chopped ones that you'd normally use. And then I've got 1 little sachet of lamb stock. And then stir these gently into the meat until all the ingredients are really well mixed together. So now you can see that the mixture is simmering. It's time to leave it for about 2 hours to slow cook. Stir it every half an hour or so to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom. Now the filling is cooked down. I've poured it into a small pie dish and I'm going to set it to one side whilst I make the pastry topping. So I've got my phyllo pastry. I'm going to spread it out into a long rectangle. Phyllo pastry is great because it adds a really nice crunch and it's really easy to work with. And then stick them together with a little bit of melted butter. And then I'm going to cover the whole sheet. The melted butter helps make sure that the pastry doesn't stick together in the oven and you get a really nice flake. And then I'm going to sprinkle over a couple of different things, starting with ground almonds. And then a sprinkle of finely chopped apricots. A little dusting of ground coriander, which gives it a nice savoury flavour. A few flaked almonds. These have been toasted so they get a nice nutty flavour through the whole pastry topping. And then it's finished off with a drizzle of sticky honey. And then start rolling up the pastry sheet into a nice long sausage shape. So roll it all up until you have one long coil and then roll it together to make a swirly shape. So this was not quite big enough to cover the top of the pie yet, so I'm going to make another sausage of pastry to roll around the outside of this coil. It's quite unusual to put a sweet topping on a savoury pie, but the flavours work really well together. Having made my second phyllo roll, I'm going to combine the two together into one big spiral. I'm just going to move that onto the top of my pie and press it down nicely so that it fits snugly on the top. And then brush with a little melted butter and finish with a sprinkle of flaked almonds. And this is ready to go into the oven at 170 degrees for about 35 to 40 minutes until it's a lovely golden brown colour and the pastry is crisp. So there it is, my lamb tagine pie, full of delicious North African flavours. This is perfect served with a nice bowl of steaming fresh vegetables.
Now, Battenberg is traditionally British, it's beautiful, but I'm going to modernise it somewhat, make it moody, dark and lavish with my Guinness and Black Battenberg. So as with any cake, this starts with a baking fat and some sugar. So into the mixer with the baking fat. Now you can do this by hand, but these are so much quicker and easier. And then I use 2 sugars for this. I use golden caster sugar, or caster sugar is fine. And I also use a dark brown muscovado sugar, and that's what makes this cake really dark, rich, treacly and fudgy. I just blend those together. Now I use Greek yogurt for this. Not only does this give the cake a real great lightness in a way, but the acid in the yogurt tenderises the crumb, so that makes such a tender textured cake. And you can never beat a tender textured cake. So beat that in. along with 2 eggs. It's time to add the dry ingredients. So sieve in the flour, self-raising flour here. Obviously it's a chocolate cake, so you need the cocoa powder. So sieve these in. Usually I wouldn't sieve flour, but because the cocoa powder always is quite lumpy, it's a good idea to put it through a sieve. Then for a bit of added extra rise, just a little bit of bicarb. And then back on the mixer. Now this already smells intensely chocolatey and gooey, but to make it even more gooey and chocolatey and intense, I'm going to add some Guinness. And this is what makes the sponge really dark, almost black. So add that in a slow stream. Now it may look quite normal, like a normal chocolate cake right now, but just you wait till it's baked. So I've got here a Battenberg tin. This is a marvellous invention. So carefully pour the batter into the tin as evenly as possible, and make sure you try and get an even amount of the batter in between each divider, otherwise you'll have a lopsided Battenberg and there's nothing worse. So give the pan a little bit of a shake. That's just to level it out nice and evenly. And then into the oven. Normally Battenbergs are covered in marzipan. Now marzipan's beautiful, I love it, but to make this more mysterious and dark, I'm going to use a black fondant or sugar paste icing, and because this is a Guinness and black Battenberg, I'm using black icing. So for the glue, Guinness and black currant jam. So a good dollop onto the icing, and spread that all over the surface of the icing. A gleaming black pool of jam, there's nothing better. The assembly and the construction is a little bit complicated, but you will get there. A bloblet of jam, a little bit more. Spread that out. Don't be too generous with the jam, because the more you put on, the more risk there is of the whole thing sliding away. Tilt that one forward and use that as a glue to stick the bottom 2 pieces together. A bit more jam on top of that, again not too much. And then repeat that on top, so a little bit of jam on that piece. It helps if you've worked in construction for this, but if not, you can still do it. Flip that over, and then top that with that one, the final one. So align and neaten as you go. And then take a deep breath and bring the icing up over the side. Push the cake into the icing just to tighten everything up a little bit. Bring it towards you. There we have it. To neaten the whole thing, just slice the edges off. You don't need to throw them away, you can still eat them, but it just makes it look a bit prettier. Be quick, bold, and swift with this, okay? And then to dress this, just a load of plump, shiny blackberries all over the top and sides. And to finish, a little bit, not too much, icing sugar. And that's it, a dark, mysterious, and totally lavish Battenberg.